Welcome to Cults and Secret Societies. I'm your host, Ben Carter. Imagine, if you will, a secluded farmhouse nestled in the serene Canadian wilderness. The peaceful exterior betrays nothing of the chilling secrets held within its walls. This is no ordinary farmhouse. It's a fortress, a commune, a prison, a place where a dangerous cult known as the Ant Hill Kids held sway in the 1970s and 80s. Led by the charismatic and manipulative Roch Thériault, the Ant Hill Kids were more than just a religious commune. They were a group bound by fear, obedience, and a twisted interpretation of spirituality. Thériault, a self-proclaimed prophet, claimed he was chosen by God to lead his followers into the apocalypse. He convinced his followers that the end of the world was imminent, and that only he could guide them to salvation. But Thériault's doctrine was far from the teachings of love and tolerance often associated with religion. Instead, it was a doctrine of control, manipulation, and abuse. His word was law, and any disobedience was met with severe punishment, often of a physical nature. The members of the Ant Hill Kids were isolated from society, cut off from their families, and entirely under Thériault's control. Thériault would hold secret meetings behind closed doors where he would dispense his teachings and prophecies, often under the influence of alcohol. These gatherings were not for the faint of heart. They were intense, intimidating, and filled with a sense of impending doom. Thériault would often use these meetings to exert his control over the group, using fear and manipulation to keep his followers obedient and subservient. The members, on the other hand, were a mix of vulnerable individuals drawn in by Thériault's charisma and promises of spiritual salvation. Many were young, impressionable, and desperate for a sense of belonging. They were willing to do anything, endure anything, if it meant they were part of something bigger, something meaningful. But beneath the surface of this commune, there lay a horrifying reality. The Ant Hill Kids were not just a cult. They were a testament to the power of manipulation, the danger of blind faith, and the devastating consequences of unchecked control. They were victims of a man who used religion as a tool for control and abuse. This is their story. Tracing the origins of the Ant Hill Kids, we have to step back to the year 1977 in a small town in Quebec, Canada. This was a time when spiritual movements, cults, and communes were gaining traction, particularly among young adults seeking an alternative to traditional religious practices. This was the cultural backdrop against which Roch Thériault, a former Seventh-day Adventist, set up his commune, initially named the Healthy, Happy, and Holy Organization. Thériault was a charismatic man with an uncanny ability to influence people. He was a persuasive speaker, with a knack for exploiting the vulnerabilities of those around him. He used these skills to gather a group of followers, lured by his promises of spiritual enlightenment and salvation. Most of them were young adults, disillusioned with the world, looking for a higher purpose, or simply seeking an escape from societal norms. Thériault started by preaching a mix of Seventh-day Adventist beliefs and his interpretations. He claimed to have visions from God, who he said had chosen him to lead his followers to salvation in the end times. He named his commune the Ant Hill Kids, drawing an analogy with ants working tirelessly to build a hill under the guidance of a single leader, just as his followers would build a spiritual haven under his leadership. The commune was located in the remote wilderness of Burnt River, Ontario. This isolation played a critical role in Thériault's control over his followers. Cut off from the outside world, the members of the Ant Hill Kids had little to no contact with their families or society. This isolation made it easier for Thériault to manipulate his followers, as he was their only source of information and spiritual guidance. The 1970s and 80s were a time of political and cultural shifts in Canada. The Quebec sovereignty movement was gaining momentum, and there was a general sense of unrest and dissatisfaction. At this time, many people were searching for spiritual guidance, and for some, Thériault provided the answers they were looking for. Yet, behind the facade of spiritual enlightenment and communal living, something sinister was unfolding. This seemingly harmless commune was, in truth, a breeding ground for physical and psychological abuse, manipulation, and control. As we delve deeper into the story of the Ant Hill Kids, we will uncover the horrifying reality of life under Thériault's rule. At the helm of the Anthill Kids was its charismatic leader, Roch Thériault. Thériault was born on May 17, 1947, in rural Quebec. He was raised in a deeply religious household, with his parents adhering to the Catholic faith. As a young man, Thériault showed a keen interest in religion, but he was also known for his rebellious and nonconformist tendencies. In his early 20s, Thériault became a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Church's teachings, which emphasized the imminent return of Jesus Christ and the importance of maintaining good health, resonated with Thériault. He quickly ascended through the ranks of the Church, gaining recognition for his compelling sermons and charismatic personality. However, Thériault's relationship with the Seventh-day Adventist Church began to sour. He developed his ideology, which was a radical departure from the teachings of the Church. Thériault began to argue that he was receiving direct visions from God, a claim that was met with skepticism and disapproval from the Church leadership. Undeterred by the pushback, Thériault left the Seventh-day Adventist Church and established his commune, the Anthill Kids, in 1977. He drew in followers by promising a utopian society, free from the moral corruption of the outside world. His teachings were a blend of Seventh-day Adventist doctrines, his unique interpretations of biblical texts, and an emphasis on communal living and self-reliance. Thériault propagated his ideology through a combination of charisma, manipulation, and fear. He claimed to be the prophet of God, chosen to lead his followers to salvation. He enforced strict rules and demanded absolute obedience from his followers. Those who questioned his authority or broke his rules faced severe punishments, which were often physical and psychological in nature. Thériault also kept his followers isolated from the outside world. He convinced them that the end of the world was imminent and that the Anthill Kids commune was the only safe haven. This belief, coupled with the community's remote location, ensured that his followers remained under his control. In this way, Thériault maintained a tight grip over the Anthill Kids. Under the guise of spiritual enlightenment, he was able to manipulate, control, and abuse his followers. Despite the horrifying reality of life under Thériault's rule, his followers remained devoted to him, a testament to the power of his charismatic leadership and manipulative tactics. But as we'll learn, this devotion would come at a terrible cost, shrouded in a chilling tale of abuse, manipulation, and ultimately, murder. While the facts of the Anthill Kids cult are disturbing enough, the web of conspiracy theories surrounding the group adds another layer of intrigue. These theories range from hidden agendas to secret alliances, and though many are based on whispers and speculation, they provide further insight into the disturbing dynamics at play within the group. One of the most prevalent conspiracy theories suggests that Roch Thériault operated with hidden support from influential figures. This theory posits that Thériault's manipulation was so effective, he wrapped not only his followers around his finger, but also managed to influence local authorities. Some speculate that Thériault had connections with law enforcement or government officials, who turned a blind eye to his activities, allowing him to run his commune without interference. There are also theories that suggest a far darker and more sinister side of the Anthill Kids. According to these theories, Thériault didn't merely see himself as a prophet, but as a form of divine being, and his ultimate aim was not just control over his followers, but the creation of a new race of humans. This idea is backed by the fact that Thériault fathered 26 children with his female followers. Many believe that this was a deliberate attempt to breed a new generation of chosen ones, who would inherit his supposed divine powers. Another theory suggests that the Anthill Kids were involved in strange arcane practices, bordering on the occult. Some former members have spoken of bizarre rituals and practices, which Thériault claimed were necessary for their salvation. These rituals included everything from self-harm to blood drinking, raising questions about whether Thériault was dabbling in darker forces. As with all conspiracy theories, these claims are difficult to prove. Evidence is often scarce, and most of it comes from the testimonies of former members who were deeply traumatized by their experiences. However, these theories do highlight the extent of Thériault's control, and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his power. They also underline the profound, terrifying mystery that surrounds the Ant Hill Kids, a mystery that continues to fascinate, horrify, and baffle us to this day. The Ant Hill Kids cult, led by Roch Thériault, was shrouded in an enigmatic cloak of symbols, codes, and secret knowledge. This clandestine system played a crucial role in maintaining Thériault's control over his followers and bolstering the cult's insular nature. The most prominent symbol associated with the cult was the ant hill, from which the group derived its name. Thériault often likened his followers to ants, emphasizing their industriousness, unity, and collective strength. Just as every ant had a role within the colony, every member of the Ant Hill Kids had a specific function within the commune. This symbol served to reinforce the cult's hierarchy and the members' unquestioning obedience to Thériault, who positioned himself as the Queen Ant, the unchallenged leader. Alongside this, Thériault devised a complex system of coded language and signs. For instance, he often referred to the outside world as the wasteland, a term laden with negative connotations that painted a grim, threatening picture of life beyond the commune. This linguistic manipulation served to instill fear in his followers, deterring them from attempting to leave. Thériault also frequently used biblical references and twisted religious teachings to his advantage. He presented himself as a prophet, claiming to possess divine knowledge and power. This self-proclaimed status allowed him to justify his cruel and abusive treatments, convincing his followers that his actions were divinely ordained. Moreover, rituals played a significant role within the cult. Thériault established a set of bizarre and sometimes brutal practices, which he argued were necessary for the members' spiritual purification. These rituals often involved physical suffering, further enabling Thériault to exert control through fear and manipulation. The symbols, codes, and rituals of the Ant Hill Kids were not mere eccentricities. They were carefully constructed tools that Thériault employed to maintain his power, to instill fear, and to isolate his followers from the outside world. These elements contributed to the creation of a closed-off universe in which Thériault's word was law and dissent was punishable by divine wrath. The cult's secrecy and insularity were its strength, allowing it to operate largely undetected for nearly a decade and leaving a chilling legacy of horror and manipulation in its wake. Over the years, attempts were made to expose the realities of the Ant Hill Kids. Most notably, Gabrielle Lavallee, one of the longest-serving members and a victim of Thériault's brutality, managed to escape in 1989. After fleeing the commune, she reported her experiences to the police. The extent of her physical injuries lent a shocking credibility to her claims, prompting the authorities to initiate an investigation into the group. Yet, it was not an easy task to penetrate the veil of secrecy that surrounded the Ant Hill Kids. Thériault and his followers were adept at deflecting attention and maintaining a facade of normalcy. They presented their community as a peaceful, spiritual retreat, a refuge from the wasteland of the outside world. This disinformation was so effective that even when social workers visited the commune, they failed to see through the cult's carefully constructed image. However, it wasn't only the disinformation that obstructed efforts to expose the cult. The group also resorted to threats and intimidation to silence those who dared to speak out. Former members who tried to share their experiences were often too terrified to provide detailed accounts, fearing retribution from Thériault and his loyal followers. This fear was not unfounded. Thériault had a history of violent outbursts and was known to bear grudges against those who crossed him. The cult's tactics of deflection, disinformation, and threats were largely successful in keeping the authorities at bay. The group was able to maintain its operations, largely undisturbed, for almost a decade. In the face of attempts to expose them, the Ant Hill Kids closed ranks, further isolating themselves from the outside world. They continued to adhere strictly to Thériault's teachings and to participate in the group's rituals, their faith in their leader unshaken despite the growing scrutiny. In retrospect, it is clear that the failure to uncover the true nature of the Ant Hill Kids earlier was not due to a lack of effort, but rather the effectiveness of the cult's strategies. The cult was not merely a group of misguided individuals, but a highly organized and manipulative entity, skilled at deception and intimidation. But as the saying goes, the truth will out, and in the case of the Ant Hill Kids, it was only a matter of time before the horrifying realities of life within the cult were brought to light. To fully comprehend the Ant Hill Kids, we must delve into the spiritual and metaphysical beliefs that underpinned their mission. The group's teachings were an amalgamation of various religious ideologies, cherry-picked and warped to suit Thériault's purposes. Central to their belief system was the notion of divine authority, specifically that Thériault was a messenger of God chosen to lead the group to salvation. Thériault claimed to have spiritual visions in which he communicated directly with God. He convinced his followers that these visions held prophetic significance and that they were the divine blueprint for the group's mission. This belief in Thériault's spiritual authority was so ingrained that his followers were willing to accept his often bizarre and brutal directives without question. The Ant Hill Kids also had a unique perspective on humanity and the cosmos. They believed that the world outside their commune was a wasteland of sin and degradation, a place in which true spiritual enlightenment couldn't be achieved. They viewed themselves as the last bastion of purity, tasked with the sacred duty of preserving humanity's spiritual essence in a world that had lost its way. Thériault propagated the belief that the group was building a new Eden, a spiritual haven that would survive the impending apocalypse. The community's isolation and self-sufficiency were seen as necessary steps in preparing for this cataclysm. The cosmos, according to the Ant Hill Kids, was a battleground between good and evil, light and darkness. Thériault was cast as the warrior of light, leading his followers in a cosmic struggle against the forces of darkness. This narrative served to further bind the group to their leader, as they saw their survival and salvation as intrinsically tied to Thériault's spiritual leadership. In the world of the Ant Hill Kids, Thériault's word was the ultimate truth. He dictated the interpretation of religious texts, controlled the group's understanding of good and evil, and defined their spiritual path. This gave Thériault immense power over his followers, who were convinced that defying him was tantamount to defying God. This deep dive into the Ant Hill Kids' belief system reveals how Thériault used spiritual manipulation to control and exploit his followers. The group's beliefs, though seemingly esoteric and spiritual on the surface, were essentially tools of control in the hands of a manipulative leader. The ensuing horror and tragedy underline the dangerous potential of such manipulation, especially when wielded by a charismatic and unscrupulous leader. The chilling legacy of the Ant Hill Kids has had a profound effect on Canadian society, leading to a significant rethinking of how such communal groups are handled by law enforcement and social services. In the aftermath of the cult's dissolution, the Canadian government and its various bodies were forced to grapple with the fact that such a brutal and authoritarian group had been able to operate within their borders for so long, seemingly undetected. In the realm of law enforcement, the Ant Hill Kids case spurred improvements in the detection and investigation of cult-like groups. Law enforcement agencies across Canada began to take reports of cult activity more seriously, leading to the development of specialized units and training programs aimed at understanding and combating the unique challenges posed by these communities. In the world of social services, the existence of the Ant Hill Kids led to a greater focus on the identification and support of individuals who may be at risk of being drawn into such groups. Outreach programs were developed to provide education and resources to individuals who might be susceptible to the allure of cult-like communities. The Ant Hill Kids case also had an impact on the way Canadian society views and understands cults. The media coverage of the group's horrific actions and the subsequent trials of its members brought the issue of cults into the public consciousness in a way that it had never been before. This led to a broader societal conversation about the dangers of such groups and the need for vigilance in preventing their formation and growth. However, the influence of the Ant Hill Kids is not confined to the realm of policy and public discourse. The group's belief system, while undoubtedly extreme and dangerous, reflects broader trends in the world of alternative spirituality. The idea of a community separated from the world, dedicated to living in accordance with a unique spiritual vision, holds a certain allure for some. This is not to suggest that the Anthill Kids' belief system has spread or influenced other spiritual communities. Rather, it serves as a stark reminder of how such ideals can be twisted and exploited by those seeking power and control. It is a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked spiritual authority and the importance of critical thinking and independent judgment in matters of faith. In conclusion, the legacy of the Anthill Kids continues to reverberate through Canadian society. Their story serves as a warning of the potential for abuse in insular communities and the need for vigilance and intervention in protecting the vulnerable. This dark chapter in Canada's history continues to inform and influence the country's approach to communal groups and cults, shaping policy, law enforcement, and public consciousness. Given the extreme and insular nature of the Anthill Kids, it's not surprising that speculation and conspiracy theories have emerged in their wake. The group's actions, beliefs, and behavior are so far removed from the norms of society that some have suggested there must be more to their story than meets the eye. One theory that has been put forward is that the group was involved in occult practices. The rituals that Roch Thériault performed, such as the bizarre and brutal medical procedures he inflicted on his followers, have been interpreted by some as rituals of a dark and supernatural nature. This theory posits that Thériault was not just a delusional cult leader, but a practitioner of dark magic who used his supposed spiritual authority to perform rituals and ceremonies aimed at gaining supernatural power or appeasing dark forces. Another theory suggests that Thériault was engaged in a form of mind control or brainwashing. His ability to convince his followers to endure and participate in extreme physical punishments and to cut ties with the outside world is seen by some as evidence of psychological manipulation on a massive scale. This theory goes beyond the psychological theories that have been proposed to explain Thériault's influence over his followers, suggesting that he may have employed advanced techniques of mind control or even hypnosis to keep his followers in line. A more outlandish theory proposes that the Anthill Kids were influenced or even controlled by extraterrestrial forces. This theory hinges on the group's isolation from society, their bizarre and brutal practices, and Thériault's reported visions. According to this view, the Anthill Kids were not just a cult, but a group that had been targeted by alien beings for some obscure purpose. These theories, like the group they seek to explain, are extreme and largely unsupported by documented evidence. Yet they persist, a testament to the human need to make sense of the senseless, to find patterns in chaos, and to seek answers, however unlikely, to the questions that disturb us the most. In the end, these theories serve as a mirror, reflecting back to us our own fears and uncertainties about the world. They remind us that, in the face of the unknowable, we are capable of imagining the unimaginable. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that the human capacity for belief is a powerful and potentially dangerous force, one that can be used to inspire or to control, to uplift or to destroy. That is the true legacy of the Anthill Kids, a dark mirror held up to the human heart, reflecting the depths to which we can sink when led astray by false prophets and misguided beliefs. As we reach the end of this harrowing journey into the darkness of the Anthill Kids cult, there remain questions that may never be fully answered. The most prominent of these is, how was Roch Thériault able to command such unfathomable devotion and obedience from his followers? Despite the theories we've explored, the precise cocktail of charisma, manipulation, and fear that Thériault employed to maintain control over his followers remains largely a mystery. Moreover, what were the true motivations behind Thériault's monstrous acts? Was he driven solely by a lust for power and control, or was there a deeper, even more insidious purpose at play? Some suggest that Thériault may have believed in his own divine status, that he saw himself as a god walking among mortals. Others posit that he was a deeply disturbed individual, driven by sadistic impulses and a pathological need to dominate and control. We may never know the full extent of the psychological damage inflicted on the remaining members of the Anthill Kids, who lived through the horrors perpetrated by Thériault. Many of them have chosen to remain silent, their experiences too painful to recount, their lives forever marked by the trauma they endured. Their stories, like many aspects of the Ant Hill Kids saga, are shrouded in silence and secrecy, their full horror known only to those who survived them. Unanswered questions also linger around the law enforcement and social services handling of the Ant Hill Kids case. How was Thériault able to elude authorities for so long, despite the numerous reports of abuse and neglect? Why were his followers' pleas for help ignored or dismissed, and what measures have been taken to prevent similar failures in the future? The answers to these questions remain elusive, leaving a cloud of suspicion and doubt hanging over the case. In the end, the Ant Hill Kids story is a chilling reminder of the human capacity for cruelty and manipulation, and the vulnerability of those who fall under the sway of charismatic leaders. It is a tale of unchecked power, of faith twisted into a weapon, of lives shattered and forever changed. It is a story that challenges us to confront the darkest corners of human nature, to question our beliefs, and to remain vigilant against the seductive power of false prophets. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Ant Hill Kids story is the uncertainty that surrounds it. Despite our best efforts to understand, to explain, to make sense of the incomprehensible, we are left with a sense of unease, a feeling that we may never truly understand the depths of the darkness that lurked within the Ant Hill Kids cult. And that, perhaps, is the most horrifying revelation of all. Thanks for listening. This has been Cults and Secret Societies. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.